Welcome to the Her Story Circle podcast, the podcast that brings you the extraordinary tales of everyday women who are changing the world. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging. Every week, we dive into the lives, challenges, and triumphs of women from all four corners of the globe. We're here to inspire, enlighten, and connect, sharing stories that uplift and empower. So grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and join us as we explore the incredible journeys of women shaping our future. This is Her Story, where every woman's voice matters. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Her Story TV and the Her Story podcast. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, how old you are, and share your story with us today.
My name is Ellen Barker, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area now, and I'm 68 years old. The first part of my story begins in the middle of the country in Missouri and in the middle of the last century when I was a child growing up in Kansas City. I lived in a working class neighborhood. My dad was a truck driver. The houses were 3 or 4 rooms. Just a ordinary little 50s place to live. Very ordinary. And then, and very white. And then when I was between maybe 7th grade and 12th grade, the neighborhood changed. The white families started moving out to the suburbs and black families began moving in. Often the white families kept the houses and rented them and didn't necessarily take care of them because they were busy wherever they were. And then a freeway was built, or they started tearing down houses in this long strip through this part of the city where I lived. And that created other problems. There were crimes taking place in those houses and squatters and fires and rats and then they built a highway and all the neighborhoods were cut off from the shops, and houses were vacant, and this huge change happened in a very short period. And, it was puzzling. The first black families who moved in were often met with a lot of terrible things, and sometimes they were burned out or they were otherwise chased away by the white people that lived there. We, of course, never knew exactly who did it. And then, which was not good for them. They're buying houses and then they're being forced out again. And it wasn't for a long time until I had gone away to college and my parents had retired and moved to a small town that I really discovered what was going on there, which we'll get to in a minute. So I was gone. My parents were gone. Everyone we knew was gone. I didn't go back to Kansas City for a long time. And then a few years ago, I had been laid off from my job, which was fine. I was ready to retire. And I went back to Kansas City for a high school reunion. And my husband and I drove down that street. And we walked up and looked at my house, which was under a blue tarp, and the yard was all overgrown, and screens were sort of flapping in the breeze, clearly abandoned, derelict. Looked in the windows, plaster's falling. It was heartbreaking. And, driving around the neighborhood, a lot of houses were just not there anymore. And then there's this freeway right just a block away. And, it was heartbreaking. And there I was, not working, and I'd always wanted to be a writer, it struck me, I can write a different future for this house. That's where it started. It just started with that. But I I started doing more research about what had happened and why, and discovered that this degradation of the neighborhood was actually pretty much planned. And it was a thing that happened in many American cities where they would, way back, 20s, 30s, would decide what part of town they were going to. This was at a time when very few Black people even owned homes. But they would designate a part of the city. This would be, sort of secret, where they would be allowed to buy houses, and then they would keep the rest of the city white. And so the area where I lived was the area, it was definitely small houses, small lots. That was the area that was decided that, to be left for Black people, or Black people would be allowed to live there. And this went on until fair housing legislation passed in the end of the 60s, and that became illegal. But it still was pervasive because there was still a lot of reluctance to break that barrier. So when I'm writing this book, I'm finding this out, and I'm also writing a book about this person who is a lot like me, who goes back and buys this house and lives in this neighborhood, and tries to repair the house and also to make some kind of new life here. So of course there was, I found myself writing a lot of memoir about what happened in my childhood in that house, in that neighborhood, and what it was like. And then started to have to confront this whole racist policy that had occurred, and what part did my family play in that? And it was rather soul searching. So but when it was finished, I thought, there's more to this book than just a novel. There's a story to be told here. And so I called the book East of Troost, which is, Troost is the barrier, the wall that was created. Troost is a street. And the book is East of Troost, which is what is still referred to. That's still how they call the neighborhood. They call it worse things than that, but East of Troost is everyone knows what that means. And that's where the book takes place, and what the book is about. So one of the things that's really made me think about is the power of the novel to educate, or maybe illuminate is a better word. I've been reading since I could, before I can remember. And I think of all the things I've learned from fiction, because it kind of sticks. It's stuck to a story. The things that when fiction, even if it's not historical fiction, but it's still about the way people think and maybe the way people reacted to things that are true in history. And it's very, you learn a lot of things through fiction. And so I worked on the novel some more, and now I've got it publisher, and it's about to be published. And I found my voice. And I've actually written several more novels that I hope to also publish after this one. They don't all deal with the same topic, but this one is close to my heart because it was kind of my lived reality. As teenagers, we were very idealistic about, ending the Vietnam War and ending racism and women finding their voice. And I kind of, I think we grew up and we kind of felt like we had solved those problems, and we so didn't. And the problems are worse than ever. And I think novels have a way of making a lot of subtle differences in the way people think about things. And, and people who are, we think we know about various issues, but maybe we don't really. And the novels can help people change their thinking, evolve their thinking, and do it in a way that's very interesting and readable and entertaining. So that's really what I'm now focused on. I have this book coming out. This is the book coming out in a few weeks. And then I have a couple more lined up after that. So that's my story. And it's where I'm going. Some of the things that that I thought about while I was working on this had to do with how people evolve and think about things at a certain age. Things are more black and white. In this case, very much black and white in your teen years, and you learn certain things, and then you need to reevaluate those, and you don't necessarily have to reevaluate them in a very in a structured way, but you seem to be open to these things, and I think novels are a good way to do that.
So you have had an interesting life, Ellen, and you've managed to capture a part of history in this fiction novel. Why did you decide to fictionalize it?
I think because I started out to write a novel about this house, about someone living in this house in the current time, moving back there, making a change. I didn't really know where it was going. On the first page, the narrator walks in the door and deals with the plaster on the floor, and then goes on from there. But and so I got into that, writing that novel. I was, I wanted to see what she did and how it worked out. So I kept writing the novel, but I kept finding myself writing about the past. And so I tried to keep it real. It was, what really happened to me in the past. But I never really wanted to try to do it as a memoir or as anything very academic. I don't feel like I have the background for that. But I could imagine this novel and make it fun to read when it wasn't sad to read, and still work in the past, and how what happened 50 years ago has this huge impact on not only the neighborhood but the whole city. I mean, when you're sort of taught to hate these people that are moving in, or you're taught to be afraid of them because they're taught that they move in, and then what happens? Your property values fall, or there's crime, and so you're fearful, and then you don't like them, and then you run away, and you never get a chance to find out that they're just people. And my parents stayed for a long time. They didn't have the money to move away, and so they did make a lot of friends in the neighborhood, and it did not, it was not terrible for them, but there was enough crime, and my father was ill, and so they did move away, and they were one of the last white families to leave that part of East of Troost. So, but that's why because I started with this story, and then I wanted to follow that main character and see where she went. So that's, I think, why I kept that up.
It's interesting that you are working on a piece of fiction that still applies to the United States today. The race relations issues in the US, a lot of people think after the civil rights movement got resolved, but they actually have not. I kind of feel like an outsider watching from the outside looking in, that there is still a lot of work to be done in terms of race relations in the United States. What is your feel? What is your take about the future for the United States right now?
It's worrisome right now, because we've gone through a period where it was made okay to hate people for their religion and their color. Without getting too political, we had 4 years of an administration that really encouraged that behavior. And so then what happened at the election sort of encouraged it further, and that's still going on. So I'm hopeful, of course, because there's a lot going on. I mean, there are a lot of people who are getting more involved and voting more than they used to. But it's
Yes.
very discouraging that what we went through with it being okay, made okay to hate, and just to not even think about people and their being just people. It's, it's not just hating people, it's putting them in baskets and putting them, drawing lines and building walls, and figurative and unfigurative. It's crazy. So it's discouraging, but that makes me want to write these books and and get people to read them.
I do like the fact that you fictionalized it, because sometimes it's easier to tell the truth through fiction than through reality. It's more
Yes.
palatable. People are more open to consuming the content because
Yes.
it's fictionalized. Whereas if you wrote it like a memoir, you would get a bit of resistance in terms of people accepting that body of content. So
That's right.
when you go back to when you started writing this book, if you could give advice to yourself, to the younger you at that point, let's say there's a young writer who is listening to us right now, has got a story, wanting to go the same route you have, what 3 nuggets of wisdom would you give them? What would you have given yourself as advice based on what you've learned so far?
Well, I think first of all, it would to do this sooner. Don't wait till you're retired. For one thing, it's easier to get published, which is not surprising. It's easier to get an agent and a publisher when you've got a long writing career ahead of you. And why wait? I always felt like I had to work and make money and not end up in poverty and have an easier life than my parents did. And I didn't start soon enough. I was in a very busy job, and I felt like that was a good excuse, not to ever do it. So that's one piece of advice. And the other I think advice for me, it's not going to apply to every writer, but I think it applies to a lot of people, a lot of writers, is I'm an introvert, and in America, that's considered kind of a fault. It's kind of it's a handicap. And I would say you got to embrace that there's a lot of power in being an introvert and being thoughtful and turned inward. Doesn't necessarily mean you're shy, but it just means you've got a lot of depth that you can use as a writer, and really makes it easier to reach out to people through your writing. So that's I think that's one of the things I learned very late in life, that there's a lot of power in introversion.
Interesting perspective. Now, my last question is, let me take you into the future. You are now 100 years old. You've got a huge career ahead of you right now, another 22 years worth of writing, if all goes well.
Yes.
If you could have a conversation with that future you, this woman who dreamed to be a writer, who finally did it at 68, and have a conversation with her, and you're sitting there looking at all the books you've published, the career you've created after retirement, what would you say to this amazing woman who's led you to that point? Thank you for tuning into the Her Story Circle podcast. I hope today's story has inspired you to believe in the power of our stories and the difference you can make in the world when you use your voice. I'm Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a rich tapestry of diverse perspectives. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast, to help us share these stories with more listeners. Follow us on social media by looking for the Her Story Circle podcast for more updates, and join us tomorrow for another episode filled with courage, resilience, and empowerment. Remember, your story matters, and together we're building a stronger, more inclusive world. Until next time, keep making her story.